All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. We have a very special show today. The guys from Nerd Sesh are coming to hang out. I have my list of contenders, which I believe is 9 teams long, and then I included a couple of fringe teams as well. So I've got 11 total teams, and we're going to play a game, and the way this game is going to work is we're going to play higher or lower. And what that means is we're going to go through each team. We're going to talk about whether or not we are higher on that team than we were at the beginning of the season or lower on that team than we were at the beginning of the season. So you can't wimp out if you're on the fence. If you feel the same, you still have to lean one way or the other. That's the game. But we're very excited to have Carson and Logan coming on the show today. Let's start with my number one championship contender coming into this season, the Denver Nuggets. Carson, are you higher or lower on them than you were at the start of the season?
So this is close to the scenario that you just described, where I feel very similarly about this team, but I would say I'm a little bit higher on them. They are my title frontrunner right now, and part of that is a team like Milwaukee that I viewed on the same level. I now have more concerns about. So by at least maintaining their level, the Nuggets move up compared to them, but also there are some things on the margins. Reggie Jackson has been legitimately really impressive this year, and I think has brought some value to that second unit, which has always been sort of sketchy. You can have Jamal with those bench-only units, but they have been lacking sort of in some offensive pop there, and he has been better than I expected. And then I think you look at some of the young guys on the wings. Christian Braun had some awesome moments in that playoff run last year, but was inconsistent. I think that he is a better all-around player now in year 2. Peyton Watson, I think you see the value of his athleticism, what he can do as a two-way guy. His shot's been solid. So it's really just the depth stuff where I think that they've improved a bit compared to my preseason expectations, but the fundamental formula is the same. Best player on the planet, this perfect cohesive starting 5. They're huge in the front court. They have awesome shooting. It's just the best offense in basketball, and I think that they can defend at a high level. So they are also my title favorite.
Yeah, I completely agree with Carson. And I think performance-wise, record-wise, I think I'd probably say that I'm lower on the Nuggets relative to the beginning of the season. What I mean by that is I just was so confident in Denver being the runaway number 1 seed in the Western Conference. But like Carson said, we're not basing this off of, record or anything. We're basing this off of what I expect in them moving forward. They are my title contender. To add on that, I think Jokic and Murray are still the best duo in all of basketball. And I just have a different level of faith with this team, continuity-wise, defensively, chemistry-wise, and the role players have gotten better. The Nuggets were not my title favorite. I was a Los Angeles Lakers enthusiast. The Nuggets are my title favorite now, and I have come around. I'm very high on the Nuggets.
So I'm higher as well. I had one concern, and I want to get back. I want to go around again to kind of get your guys' take on this, but the thing with Jokic's jump shot concerns me a little bit. Like it's down almost 20% in efficiency from where it was last year. And last year he was efficient throughout the regular season and then was efficient in the postseason. The year before he struggled in the regular season and then he struggled in the postseason. And so it does concern me a little bit, but I think it's made up for the fact that they've been a much better regular season defense than they were last year. They've had a couple of months, specifically October and December, where they were both in those 2 months among the best defenses in the league. Reggie Jackson, you mentioned the offensive stuff. I actually like the way he's been competing on defense too. It's just another guard that'll fight over the top of the screen and compete. And then again, Peyton Watson just kind of replacing that Bruce Brown athleticism off of the bench, and Christian Braun as well. There's enough there to kind of make up for any sort of concern about Jokic's jump shot as it pertains to comparing to where I felt before the season. That said, as we know, specifically in the Lakers series, that over-the-top shot making was an important part of Denver's success. So let's start with you, Carson. Are you concerned at all about Jokic's jump shot and what that might mean for this year's postseason run?
Not really, just because I still think in the scope of things, he's shooting the ball pretty damn well. He's 35% from deep, which is a little bit below where he was last year in the regular season, and certainly not at the level he was at in the postseason, where he was 46% from 3. And we know that that is the one component that makes him truly unguardable. When in that pick and pop game, you can't leave him. When as a spot up guy, he can hit 45% of his threes, blending that with the interior scoring dominance and playmaking. That's when it's like, cool, this is the best offensive player that we've ever seen. And he hasn't been at that level of sharpshooting, but 52% for mid-range, his bread and butter shots there are still mostly falling. We have seen that he can run hot and cold. It feels like every year he has that one little stretch where he's down But generally, when it comes to the postseason, when it matters most, he's able to deliver with that big time skilled shot making. And I still have a lot of faith that he will.
And it's important to preface that last playoff run was one of the greatest runs ever, individually by any player ever. To expect Jokic to be back at that level would to expect another one of the greatest runs ever. And while his perimeter shooting may be down, like over his last 10 games, he's only shooting 1-3 a night. I still think he's getting to his good looks. And there's just a level of confidence I have with Jokic as a shooter. He's got great touch, great shooters. That touch doesn't wane away. It doesn't leave you. He may be hitting a skid this year, but I think when it comes playoff time, when the chips are down, there's nobody in the NBA that I have more confidence in showing up and performing than Nikola Jokic.
Yeah, to me, the optimism is that they didn't just win last year; they dominated last year. Mm-hmm. So, there's just margin for error there. I do think the gap is a little bit more substantial than people realize. Jokic jump shot was worth 1.21 points per shot in the postseason last year, which is absolutely insane. But it was worth 1.17 for the entire regular season. Mm-hmm. So he shot nearly that level the entire regular season. He's down at 1.04 points per jump shot in this season. And we did see, again, in that Sixers game, there's a tendency that teams have right now to ignore him on the pick and pop, which was not a thing that you saw last year. Last year, there was so much more driving that closeout as guys are chasing him off of the 3-point line. So I do think it's worth mentioning. But again, they dominated last year, so there's a hefty gap. And then there's just so much more other things with Denver to be excited about as it pertains to their defense and the young athleticism on the roster popping. All right, moving on to my number 2 championship contender, the Boston Celtics. Logan, are you higher or lower on the Boston Celtics than you were to start the season?
I can't believe I'm saying this because my expectations were so high for the Boston Celtics coming into this year. I'm higher on them. This Celtics team is historically great. Just 31 teams since 2000 have notched 32 wins in their first 41 games. 10 of those teams won the title, an additional 3 made the NBA Finals. So the track record is good. And it's just such an absurdly talented collection of players. Tatum, JB, Porzingis, Holiday, D. White, Horford shooting the hell out of the ball. He's over 40% this year, and they gel really well together. An interesting stat that I found about this team, against the Spurs, the Celtics became the second only team in NBA history to make at least 11 more three-pointers than their opponent in 3 consecutive games. The only other team to do that is the 2016 Warriors, and I just think that speaks to how Boston can just boat race teams. They can just shoot you out of games, and it's a double-edged sword because the one part of me says, come playoff time, they can just blow out teams game to game. If they get hot, there's so many shooters down this roster that they can just shoot you out. But I also think there's a really heavy reliance on the 3 ball that scares me, that when they need shot variance in the playoffs and they need to vary up that shot selection, can they do it? I'm higher on them because I've been so impressed at the talent. I've been so impressed at the defense and the shooting ceiling. But I'm still a little scared about the Celtics in big moments, in grimy games, in those rock fights that we see. Can they get it done? That being said, I am higher on them. This is a historically great start to this regular season.
I'm higher on the Celtics too. I think that they have separated from the Bucks in terms of my Eastern Conference contenders, and so that's kind of the standard that I'm holding them to when I'm looking at how I feel relative to preseason expectations. And this is one of the most overwhelmingly talented basketball teams at the top of the roster that we've seen. And especially in terms of the 3rd through 5th guys, to have legitimate all-star level players in terms of impact with Drew and KP and Derek White, dudes who just make so many winning plays in their respective ways to complement your 2 big-time shot creators and shot makers on the wings. It's just really ideal modern basketball construction. I loved the KP edition. I thought some people undersold that he was legitimately coming off of a career year in Washington, and I understand that people didn't really value it that much in that situation, but he was defending at the highest level we'd seen. He was doing the most effective mismatch attacking and bullying out of the post that we'd ever seen, and that stuff has really translated. He adds a new dimension to this offense to me in terms of having that reliable guy who can finish around the rim on the interior, who can just brutalize mismatches out of the post where he has been mind-bendingly efficient, and overall just break that reliance on the 3 ball that Logan's talking about a bit, where you're not just necessarily settling for pull up three after pull up three or one pass catch and shoot threes. As we've seen, that's when things can go a little bit south for Boston. Even though they are a great shooting team, they can get off there. And then that's when the lulls can start to develop. And he's been an awesome interior defender, like one of the most effective rim protectors in the league. Derek White was awesome post All-Star break. He's been even better this year. And when you look at crunch time offense, where the Celtics process has always been a bit of a concern, Tatum and Jayson breaking down a bit as playmakers, turning the ball over too much, settling for tough shots, he's a guy you can lean on. In fact, it's a small sample size with all clutch stats in a regular season, but the Celtics offense has been great there. And specifically, KP is their number 1 clutch scorer and Derek White is their number 3 clutch scorer. So they just have more dudes this year who you can lean on in those settings. And I do think that Jason Tatum has improved. And there may be nothing on the raw stat sheet that reflects that, but the one complaint that I've most consistently had about his game is that predictability and the reliance on the pull-up threes in the postseason and how his game can sort of fade away if those shots just aren't falling. He has really increased his post-up volume this year, and he has been awesome in those spots. He's averaging 1.2 points per post-up. So he's been more physical in those situations, and we're seeing more shot variety from him, more comfort attacking from the mid-range. So the Celtics just look better across the board to me. Really, my only concerns are big depth if KP goes down, because we know that he is a historically very injury-prone player. And I guess I would say that consistent crunch time offense and the ability still potentially to fall into those lulls, but I am far less concerned about that this year than last year. It's just still a difference maker when I compare them to, for example, Denver. And I do think that Denver has the more reliably great offense because they have the best player on the floor, because he is always going to generate those high quality looks around the rim and in the paint. And they also have this elite shooting. But Boston is a phenomenal basketball team.
Yeah, there's less variance with what Denver does. I think that's what makes them a bit of a safer bet. And again, when we're talking about flaws with Boston, it's important to mention that like there's a big drop off after this point, in my opinion. And so that means like when we're discussing flaws, it's all relative to the field. I think there's a lot of like specific things that they're better at than I expected. Tatum just being way bigger than he was last year has helped a lot. You talked about the leaning more on the post-up attack as a method of just generating higher quality shots around the rim. Big shock, Kristaps Porzingis fit ended up being perfect. They're leaning more into Derek White as an initiator. That's been kind of like their counter to some of Tatum's decision-making stuff, is like have him set ball screens for Derek White and kind of see if they can get some stuff out of that. The shooting variance thing is interesting because, like, first of all, there's a lot more highs than lows on that front.
Yeah.
I don't think people realize just how crazy that stat Logan threw out was. Like, think about that. Over a 3-game stretch, they outscored their opponent by more than 100 points from the 3-point line. Like that's absolutely insane, right? That's a completely insane stat. That said, I do think we're underplaying the Tatum pull-up shooting thing a little bit. He's in a red hot stretch right now. He's 22 for his last 45 over the Celtics' last 10 games, which is like almost 1.5 points per shot. So like really, really useful there. But it's very clear that Tatum's leaning into it. Like he's hunting the pull-up three. That is what he wants to take. The dead giveaway to me was he got Karl Towns on a switch at the end of the Minnesota Timberwolves game and had space to operate and looked for and made a move hunting a pull-up three in a game where they were down by 4 in the final minute. So that tells you a lot about Tatum's approach. So last question before we move on from Boston, and I'll start with you, Carson. Like, are you concerned at all about the fact that Tatum seems to be tying a good chunk of his success to whether or not the pull-up three-point shot falls?
Yes, I am. And I don't mean to underplay that concern because I think that has been a fundamental issue with the Boston Celtics. And they have been an extremely talented team. They're even more overwhelmingly talented now. But at the end of the day, I still think they need Jason Tatum to play at that consistent superstar level over the entirety of a playoff run. And he has had such high highs, but he has also had uncharacteristically low lows for a player of that caliber. Like the meme of how every other game or every 3 games, Jason Tatum's going to shoot 30% is very real. And it's because of that heavy reliance on pull-up threes, where over the last couple seasons, he's on a tear right now, but he hasn't that reliably been a very efficient pull-up three-point shooter, and he wasn't in the playoff run last year. So yes, I do think that can bite them, and if I had more confidence in Tatum like just consistently attacking from all over the floor, not falling into that over-reliance on the pull-up three, maybe Boston would be my title favorite. But it is the little things like that that still hold them back when I compare them to such a reliable juggernaut like Denver.
It is the little things like that. And for example, I mean, when he's in these lulls too, Tatum has the tendency to keep trying to shoot himself out of the lull. You know what I mean? In those late game situations, I just think the more easy offense is a kick down to the low block. Tatum literally just driving and trying to get downhill and get the ball to touch the paint to collapse the defense. I know, Carson, and I agree with a lot of what you said with White, with Porzingis, with Tatum playing better and being more dynamic. That is still my chief concern about the Boston Celtics. I don't know how it can't be. Like, they're going to give the rock to Tatum, and it is on his shoulders to close out games when it comes playoff time. That's still my biggest red flag about Boston and why I can't put them over Denver.
To Carson's point, there have been 8 games this season when Tatum shot below 40% from the field. As a point of comparison, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has only had 3 such games. So that goes to show you just some of the variance as it pertains to the types of shots that Jason Tatum takes and how that can lead him to have some really, really rough nights. The NBA season is in full swing, and when I can't get enough of the action on the court, I spice things up by betting on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official partner of the NBA. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. I was looking at the lines for making the playoffs today, and you can get the Lakers at plus 115 to make the playoffs, and the Warriors, check this out, at plus 205 to make the playoffs. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app with code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. New customers can bet $5 on the NBA and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. The crown is yours. All right, moving on to my number 3 contender, the Milwaukee Bucks. Starting with you, Carson, are you higher or lower than you were on the Milwaukee Bucks before the season?
I'm lower, because they were my pick actually to win it all. I had them beating Denver in 7 in my theoretical finals because I looked at this roster and I thought the one thing that this team has been missing consistently is that seamless, dynamic shot creator in the half court. And I thought there are very few guys who fill that role better than Damian Lillard. What I underestimated in that equation was how significant the step back this team would take defensively was, because we are now looking at a team that is still struggling mightily with point of attack defense, that is 20th in defensive rating, and that really consistently struggles to stop anyone. I also think that because of just the increased trend we've seen of them getting smaller and less athletic in the backcourt, this has gone from a dominant rebounding team, which they've consistently been with that huge front line with a bigger, more athletic, better rebounding guard like Jrue Holiday, to a team that is 18th in rebound rate. So just overall, that defensive ceiling has gone way, way, way down, and I don't see easy fixes on this roster. They're playing a guy like Andre Jackson more. He's doing a good job. Ultimately, he's not a dude who I think that you can lean on in a playoff run, because offensively, I think that he's a guy who teams are probably going to ignore and he won't be able to make them pay. Marjon Beauchamp isn't a guy who's at that level. So that still needs to be addressed. And I think that the pipe dream of like an Alex Caruso is gone. I just don't think they have the assets to make that happen. I would be targeting a Quentin Grimes if I were them, because New York is apparently looking to move him. I think that his value is at an all-time low. And no, that's not an ideal solution, but I do think it's an upgrade in terms of filling that 3-and-D point of attack defender role. And then I have a couple other little concerns about Milwaukee, like Chris Middleton has been trending in the right direction. He's playing more. I would say that he's been good in his minutes. I just, at this point, am questioning, can he play 32 minutes a game over an entire playoff run? Can he stay healthy? Can he be at the level that they need? I still totally believe in him as a difficult shot maker and a playmaker. I worry, though, a bit about the athleticism at his age, the two-way impact of the rebounding. And Dame, I would say I've been a bit underwhelmed by, just because he was coming off of maybe the best offensive season of his career, and I thought this will be a great situation playing with Giannis, an awesome spot-up shooting. But I think it's mostly just a shot-making issue with him. Like, his touch shot-making has been a bit off. He hasn't shot as well from 3 as we're used to. I still think he's a really good fit here. Defensively, he's not been nearly good enough. But offensively, I still think he does solve a ton of their issues. And they've been a really, really good offense this year. The tandem of him and Giannis, to me, still gives them a real chance against anybody. but the defensive issues are more pronounced than I expected for sure.
Yeah, I wanted to straddle the fence on the Bucks. This is kind of what I expected from Milwaukee. I am lower on the moving forward, and it is because of the defense. I wonder if we took Coach Bud a little for granted. I know it's hard stepping in as a new coach, but I don't really think Adrian Griffin really has anything schematically or anything that they can do in game. I think that really matters when it comes playoff time, and I also don't think they have the personnel. Another defensive stat, the Milwaukee Bucks are once again the worst in the NBA at forcing turnovers. They have the lowest turnover rate defensively in the NBA. That matters to me too. Not only can they not get stops, they can't force big plays and get out in transition as easily as they used to. I think they need to make a move personnel-wise. I think they have to go out and get somebody, but I don't really think this team can stop anybody that can get to the rack come playoff time. And that matters to me. Like, I think that it would make a series against the Knicks competitive. I think it would make a series against the Miami Heat competitive. Like, I think the Bucks, as great as they are offensively, and I agree with Carson, I would never count out a tandem of Dame and Giannis out from the finals. I think it's going to be a sweat against any team that Milwaukee goes up against because of their issues defensively.
Yeah, I'm lower as well. I started the season with them at number 2 originally, and then I moved the Celtics over them. Mm-hmm. The point of attack defensive issues ended up being way worse than I even thought they would be. You know, Dame was a really bad defensive player in Portland, but I always cut him the slack because that just wasn't what that team did well. Like, it didn't even make sense for Dame to compete at the point of attack. They didn't even have a good backline defensively. But he's been like, because I've watched so much tape on the Bucks this year, keying in on their defense, and like, Malik Beasley's trying. He really is trying. He's just a little, he's small. He's a little small. And then like 1 out of every 4 possessions, he'll make a mental mistake of some kind. Mm-hmm. But like, he's trying. But like, Dame could give a shit, like, for lack of a better term. Some of the most embarrassing defensive clips I've seen from a guard this season have come from Damian Lillard. And I'm not sure if that's one of those things where he plans on gearing up when they get closer to the postseason, or plans on making those efforts when he gets there. But they need to be transcendently great offensively to make up for the defense that they have. Now, the offensive metrics they put up have been good, but there have been some stretches, particularly at the end of games, where they get a little indecisive about what they want to do. There's still some stuff with the Dame Giannis pick and roll where I feel like they're leaving some meat on the bone. Mm-hmm. There's still some stretches where you can tell Chris is like, hey, why am I not getting the ball more? Or Chris has the ball and you're like, hey, why isn't Dame involved in this sequence right now? There's still some stuff that they have to sort out on that front. And then there's just some bad vibes. Like, this team is 28-12 or 28-13, something like that. They have the 3rd best record in the league. And they just have these lifeless efforts on some of these nights where you're like, what is going on with this team? Which is it's just weird to even imagine a team that's a bottom 10 defense that has the 3rd best record in basketball. Like, it almost doesn't even make sense. Now, I like the idea of Quentin Grimes because I do think that he is a much, much better point of attack defender than Malik Beasley. And if they get somebody like that, I think that could go a long way towards helping their issues. But I keep coming back to this, and this is my major concern. They're slow. Yeah. Whenever Giannis isn't out there, they are a slow team. I don't know if either of you guys managed to catch that Cavs game the other night, but like, they got boat raced and they literally looked like they were stuck in the mud. It literally looked like when I was in JUCO, and every once in a while at the beginning of the season, they'd schedule like a bunch of dudes in their 30s to come play in an exhibition game because they needed to fill 30 games on the schedule. And so we'd play like, I remember we did this in Utah. We played like a team of a bunch of like dudes from like Salt Lake City who like came down and played against us, who were just like former college players, but we were just so much faster. You know what I mean? Like that's literally what it reminded me of watching that game. I'm like, holy crap. It's like they are just standing around. They look like shocked by the speed of the Cavs, and they're just running it down the other way in transition. Now, obviously Giannis didn't play in that game, but that's the concern, is outside of Giannis, they just don't have a lot of team speed. All right, moving on to number 4 on my list. A team that wasn't even on my contender list to start the season, the Los Angeles Clippers. Logan, are you higher or lower on the Clippers than you were to start the season?
I'm much higher on the Clippers. I don't ever really buy into Clippers hype, period. I mean, there's an organizational track record. There's an injury history with all of these guys. I was very, very, very low on the Clippers heading into this season. And then obviously they make the James Harden deal, and I was pretty low on them after the Harden deal. I didn't really have high expectations. And I've been really impressed with James Harden. His commitment to playing a role and feeding these other guys. Like, this stat kind of blew me away, guys. He's got the highest plus minus of any Clipper over the last 10 games. And that is even while he's shooting 15 points a game pretty inefficiently, shooting 40% from the field, 38% from deep over that time period. Like, he's just a valuable asset on the court. And I think there's a better fit in LA than in Philly. Obviously, there's a lot of alleviated pressure off of his shoulders. He's no longer the number 2 guy. He can play the number 3 guy here. So I think Harden deserves a ton of credit for what he's done. And then I think the other guy that I think is an unsung hero of this Clippers team is Big Zoo. Like, they just have such a great interior anchor here. He is a consistent play finisher. He's an awesome big body to have underneath the rack. And he's holding players 12.4% below their average field goal percentage inside 6 feet. Minimum 6 shots defended per game. That's the 4th best mark in the NBA. On top of those 2 guys who deserve credit, I think there's really good depth here. Bones, Mann, Powell, Westbrook, Plumlee. Kawhi is playing out of his mind. I'm very high on the Clippers. The only concern that I have is the one that I mentioned at the top of this, and that is injury concerns come playoff time. I just don't know if these guys can be healthy, but if they're healthy, I think the Clippers are a very, very scary team to run into. They've been elite offensively, and then you just think about personnel-wise, an anchor like Big Zoo on the inside, and they've got 2 big wing stoppers that they can throw at your 2 best perimeter offensive players. I like the Clippers a lot. I was not anticipating saying that at the start of the year. I am much, much higher on LA.
Yeah, I'm much higher on them as well. Much higher than I was on them preseason, and much higher on them than I was at the moment that they made the Harden trade, which I thought was the right thing for them to do, because if they didn't do it, I was worried that they would just completely lose out on any sort of Kawhi PG window, and their priority is just clearly winning basketball. Steve Ballmer is out there in his construction hat talking up the wall. Like, they've got the new arena. They need to win basketball games, and retaining Kawhi and PG was really the only way for them to do that. And adding a guy like James Harden, I think, at least unlocked a ceiling, or would unlock some optimism where it's okay, we can work with this now that we have this 3rd star. But they have been legitimately great. Over these last 30 games now, ever since that early skid with Harden, they're top 3 in offensive rating, and it's a very intuitive formula. They have elite shooting with multiple killer ball handlers, and Harden really has been an awesome fit. There's been 2 things over the years that I'm like, all right, the Clippers need offensively. One of them is a consistent rim pressurer, which I still think this team is missing, and that's one of the concerns that I have about them, as good as they are. And a more intuitive lead playmaker. They've always relied very much on PG and Kawhi to create everything for this offense from the wings, and I've just felt like sort of what we've seen with Boston. The Clippers were always a better version of that, but it does help to have a guy who you really can lean on for that decision-making, that high-end pick-and-roll feel, setting people up. And Harden has done an awesome job of that, and he has just been brutalizing dudes with efficient scoring over the course of this season, because now oftentimes he's getting teams' 3rd best perimeter defenders in isolation. There's just not a lot of dudes who can do anything with James Harden if you're the team's 3rd best perimeter defender. And I do have the utmost faith in Kawhi. I think that there are some dudes who have made really strong cases this year, but Kawhi is probably still one of the 5 dudes who I want most over a playoff run if I know that he is healthy. I think that he has a legitimately unstoppable scoring formula because he is so great as a pull-up shooter, and because he can get to his spots at will, because he's strong enough out of isolation, out of the post, to just work his way to that mid-range area and consistently devastate you. And like, since he got to LA, he has been spectacular in basically every single playoff run. And the other positive of the Harden move is that you don't have to rely on like the Russ swing factor roller coaster as much as I would have expected before the year, because we saw he had some good moments in the playoff run where they needed him to step up, and he had some ugly moments, and he always has, and he always will. So I definitely feel much better. I do have some concerns. One is the rim pressure, as I mentioned. They have been better at it this year than ever before, but in previous playoff runs, and we've talked about this before, the Clippers have been so reliant on the 3 ball and on their pull-up jump shooting, and that's just going to be a volatile experience. And consistently in the series they've won, they have shot the lights out, and in the series they have lost, it's been because they haven't been able to consistently knock down those threes, and they don't have enough other alternatives. They don't have enough consistent rim pressure. They're still 22nd in field goals made inside 5 feet this year. It's better. It's not an ideal number. I'm still worried about James Harden regressing in the playoff. There's less of a scoring burden on him than ever before, which is great, but I still worry about his ability to consistently get to and finish around the rim when he's not getting foul calls in a more physical environment against playoff defenses. We saw last year he was brutal around the rim. He shot like 30% in the playoffs around the rim, and that led to this crazy volatility where, yeah, if his step back threes were money, then he could go off, and he was utilizing the mid-range more, but I'm still worried about his game scaling as well to the postseason because it really never has. I'm worried if this team can reach an elite two-way ceiling. They're 13th in defensive rating over the last 30. It's solid. It's not great, though. And when they have to match up against some of the huge teams out west, I don't think that they're like totally outclassed there because they have Kawhi and PG who are bigger wings. And then they're not like fours, though. They're kind of in this range where they're like big for threes. And then Zoo can match up physically. But compared to like Denver, compared to Minnesota, they're not as huge in the front courts. So it's tough for me to bet on them against Denver, but overall, they're a really good basketball team, and they're a real threat in a way that I didn't quite anticipate.
Yeah, I'm much higher on the Clippers as well. Big shock. It's hard not to be when they won 17 out of 20 games at one point. Yeah. It's funny. I kind of divide the NBA teams into like different archetypes, for lack of a better word. To me, there's like the big, classic, traditional playoff teams. And this is your Denver, your Milwaukee, your Lakers, your Minnesota Timberwolves. These are the teams that have massive front lines and they're big on like physical imposition on the game. And then there's like these perimeter oriented drive and kick, pull up shooting, skill finesse teams. And to me, the best team in that group is the Celtics. Mm-hmm. But the second best team in that group is obviously the Clippers. I'd take them over the Thunder. I'd take them over the New Orleans Pelicans. I'd take them over the Phoenix Suns. Like those are all those teams, whether it's Brandon Ingram or it's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or it's CJ McCollum or it's, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, all those guys. Like I just trust Paul George and Kawhi and James Harden in that group on both ends of the floor more than I trust any of those other groups, not just from the standpoint of skill either, but in terms of experience. And Kawhi does bring a physical imposition on the game. It's kind of similar to with Boston. Like Boston's a little bit of both. Like Boston has this like kind of skill approach, but Jason Tatum is just a huge person. And Kristaps Porzingis brings real rim protection. And Drew Holiday brings a real perimeter strength element, right? Even Jaylen Brown as well. So like that archetype there, in the Western Conference, at least, the Clippers are the best version of that. I think the Harden fit piece, you brought up Russell Westbrook. Russell Westbrook has great highs and great lows. And it buys Ty Lue just the ability to kind of like make a call. Like, okay, tonight's not the night. We're leaning more on Terrence Mann. This is good Russ night. We're leaning more on Russ. Like he can kind of make that call. And to the point that Logan made, even in terms of wing stoppers, Terrence Mann and Russell Westbrook in the playoffs last year kind of showed this as well, but having those guards that can take some of those high leverage point of attack assignments too, it puts all that length and athleticism off the ball, which can cause some problems too for defense or for offenses when you have Kawhi and Paul George kind of ranging off the play with all their length and their IQ. James Harden too, just setting people up with incredible spot up opportunities. The Clippers have been the best 3-point shooting team in the league this year. Norman Powell and Paul George have been two of the very best spot up players in the league at volume this year. Paul George is just it's like he's playing king of the court in a closeout setup where like you have to throw the ball in like from under the basket and close out to the 3-point line. Like he's just playing one-on-one with a huge advantage. He's been their best player over the last month too. The injury risk is a real thing.
Yeah.
But it's just not worth talking about because like one of two things is going to happen. They're going to get there and they're going to be hurt and we can write them off, or they're going to get there and they're going to be healthy and we need to kind of conceptualize what it's going to look like if they're healthy. And if they're healthy, it's going to be Kawhi fighting to spots. It's going to be James Harden setting them up for good opportunities. You're right. Like James Harden's getting the third best perimeter defender instead of the second, instead of honestly the best. Like in Philly, he was getting the best perimeter defender, right? So like all of that stuff is worth bringing up. And I again, a lot has to go right for them. My major concerns are they're a bad defensive rebounding team and they rely not almost entirely, but their bread and butter is pull-up jump shots. So like a lot of pull-up jump shooting. They take the second most in the league. I think only the Dallas Mavericks take more, if I remember correctly. And then they don't defensive rebound well. Those are two And then they don't score a ton in the paint either. They're like 17th or 18th in points in the paint per game. So like those are like three historical markers that tell us that this kind of a team typically doesn't win the title. But how often do we have James Harden, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard all in the same team in NBA history too? So I think that's worth mentioning. They're looking a lot more like what I expected the Suns to look like during the regular season, which is like outskilling teams. You know what I mean? So credit to the Los Angeles Clippers. All right, number 5, the Los Angeles Lakers. Carson, are you higher or lower on the LA Lakers halfway through the season?
I am lower. I had them as my second favorite out west coming into the year, definitely firmly below Denver, but I really believed in the combination of AD and LeBron, and I thought they could reach a really high defensive ceiling, and I thought that they had improved the supporting cast and had introduced some more shooting, and things just haven't quite materialized as I hoped. The shooting hasn't been quite as good as I hoped. They're a 20th percentile spot-up team. They're not an awful shooting team, but I thought that they could be a little bit better. And I think I overestimated the value of some of the additions. Like, I've always been a huge Christian Wood guy, and maybe I was unreasonably optimistic about what he could do. We still haven't really seen Gabe Vincent, so it's tough to evaluate that, but I thought he would be a valuable guard depth piece. And I think that I overestimated the team defense here, and like we're talking about with Milwaukee, underestimated how much having issues at the point of attack would inhibit this team there, because I've had so much faith in the backline defenders in both situations, but point of attack defense has been an issue for the Lakers. It's caused them to go to these weird starting lineups we've seen where they're trying to emphasize getting their athletes out there, the Cam Reddishes and the Vandos, and then you negate some of the offensive skill, and they just haven't really found the role players who can do both of the things they need, bring offensive skill and bring point of attack defense. And as we've talked about, I think that that's something that they need to find at the deadline. I also thought this team would rebound better. I thought they'd end possessions a little bit better. And they've actually been a good defensive rebounding team. It's more been offensively, but just Torian being like the worst rebounding 3 in the NBA is not ideal. And then I've had more issues with Darvin Ham this year than previously. The rotational stuff to me has just been deeply concerning. And I think that the effort level every single night, yeah, it's attributable to this being a team that's led by LeBron, who's 39 years old, but I think that a coach still bears some responsibility in getting his dudes up to play every game, and nobody's been worse in terms of effort night to night than the Lakers. So there are these little things, but nothing to me that is like, oh, this team can't reach the ceiling that I anticipated if they make the right move at the deadline here, because AD has been really good this year, but most importantly, LeBron has been much better than he was in the playoffs last year. He has still been one of the most dominant athletes in the league. His jump shot has returned. Like, that to me is so significant and so encouraging. And I still do think this team defense will be better in the playoffs than now, because they do have combinations they can go with in terms of guys at the point of attack. They have the best defender on the planet. And then we'll see. We'll see if they bring in DeJounte Murray, which I know is strongly rumored. I don't think it necessarily has to be a guy who brings that sort of star label. And if DeJounte does come to LA, I think that he's going to have to undergo a bit of an attitude change, because I haven't really liked how he's approached things in Atlanta as of late. And he's going to have to completely find his defensive identity again, because he has the tools. He was awesome in San Antonio. He has just lost it on that side of the ball in Atlanta. So if he's going to fit as I think Lakers fans hope, he's got to be the two-way guy that he has the tools to be. So I'm not out on the Lakers, but again, until we actually see that they hit on that move and they address the issues that they have, teams like the Clippers, teams like the Timberwolves are just playing much, much better basketball right now.
Yeah, I really agree with a lot of what you said, Carson, and I'm obviously completely lower on the Lakers than I was at the start of the season. I not only thought that they were going to figure it out as the season goes along, and they were my title favorite. I mean, I just thought that they were going to win a lot of games. I thought this team was going to gel together a lot more. The one encouraging thing is LeBron and Anthony Davis, right? That was a huge variable, a huge concern coming into this season. But I mean, shout out Alanis Morissette, guys. Isn't it ironic? I think we find ourselves right back in the exact same spot we were last year. The same old Lakers, man. I don't know what it is with these big brands, man. You got the Dallas Cowboys choking in the playoffs again. You got the Los Angeles Lakers searching for an entire new roster, guys. I mean, literally top to bottom, all of these guys that I thought were going to be home runs, that I thought were perfect fits, I'd chop everybody again. I mean, D'Lo, Taurean Prince, Cam Reddish, Hachimura. I'm talking full on fire sale. I am shopping everyone. I am searching for whatever we can do. And sadly, guys, I don't think it's enough time. We talked about that precedent last year. It was going to be really hard for a team to basically completely overhaul their roster at the deadline and then figure it out. I find myself in the exact same situation this year. Even if they make all the moves, if they make the right acquisitions, and I think it will fit together, I don't really think it's enough time for them to figure everything out. So again, like Carson said, I wouldn't completely count out this team. I would never completely count out a team with Anthony Davis and LeBron James, but I'm not betting on it. And I am much, much lower on the Lakers than I was at the start of the season.
There's a lot of positive. Carson mentioned LeBron looks better than he did last year. He's having a little bit of a classic LeBron January, which is, I had heard rumblings behind the scene that he was like completely done with Darvin Ham. And so I do think there was a little bit of passive aggressive LeBron going on. We even had that Brian Windhorst report. I sent it to our mutual friend Logan, the one from Brian Windhorst where he was like, LeBron might not play for the Lakers next year. And I was like, this is classic LeBron right here. Like this is this is exactly what I expect to see from him right around this time of year. This is his June this is Le GM's June right here. This is where it all goes down, right? But like I think so Anthony Davis's shot making isn't where it was in the 2020 bubble, but I think this is the best Anthony Davis has ever played. I think the playmaking and just the overall offensive fulcrum stuff is at such a higher level than it's ever been. Whereas Anthony Davis, if you remember in that 2020 season, he'd have some really bad halves where like if his jumper wasn't falling, he wouldn't look particularly good. I think the all-around element of Anthony Davis right now is the best it's ever been. Austin Reeves is making strides as a shot creator. It's funny, Lakers fans like they oscillate back and forth between D'Lo and Austin based on who's having a good game and a bad game. It's like D'Lo's had a couple good games in a row, and everyone's like, "Don't trade D'Lo, trade Austin. Like he's the best player." And it's like next thing you know, D'Lo will be bad for 2 weeks, and everybody like, "Oh yeah, that's right, Austin's better." That's how it goes. But like Austin, in my opinion, is like making strides. He's one of only 11 players in the league this year to run at least 500 pick and rolls that have amounted to at least 1 point per possession. He's at 1.08 points per isolation possession. Then he can have games like he did against the Mavericks where he's primarily off the ball and he's just this awesome connector who can, attack closeouts and make that extra pass. I think there's so much positive there, but I'm still lower on the Lakers just because of the bad vibes. Like Carson, you mentioned, you said arguably, I think they're the worst effort and energy team in the league right now. Yeah. They like even this recent stretch, it's like they beat the Clippers, they beat the Thunder, they beat the Mavs, they beat the Toronto Raptors. There is an absolute egg in there against the Phoenix Suns where they just came out at home and didn't play hard. Like from the opening tip, they just got shellacked. You know what I mean? So like NBA history tells us that kind of team doesn't win the title. Now, here's the thing. A lot of time left. I think the big indicator for me is going to be, can they go on like I said this on my show the other day, like, can they have a run like they did after the trade deadline last year, where they go 18-8 or 17-9 or 19-7, where it's like a clear indicator of we are now going to establish the habits that we did not establish to start the season. And last thing on the Lakers front, it's really, to me, like when you start like thinking about the matchups, because LeBron really is the major culprit in the Laker defense since the in-season tournament is LeBron. I was literally watching the Mavs game the other night, and Derek Lively gets 3 baskets right under the basket, like 2 dunks and a layup in the first 4 or 5 possessions for the Mavs. All 3 of them were plays where LeBron, as the low man, could have blown them up, and he was like, "Nah, I'll just get the next one." he just went down the floor. So like, here's the thing. Like, let's just do this exercise. So the Minnesota Timberwolves have been one of the worst half-court offenses in the league this year. And I'm really concerned about their ability to score in the half court against a really good defense when we get into the playoffs. If a playoff series started tomorrow and the Lakers were healthy and you knew you were getting a fully engaged LeBron James and Anthony Davis, even if they didn't make a trade, like, I know the record says Minnesota's playing way better basketball, but like, I'm tempted to take the Lakers in that series, even before a trade. I'll just ask you guys real quick. Carson, would you take the Lakers or the Wolves? Series starts tomorrow. Lakers are healthy. You're getting an engaged LeBron.
I think I would take the T-Wolves. And the one real quick point that I will make is the T-Wolves have not been a good overall offense, but they actually have been 73rd percentile in half-court efficiency. And I do kind of like them a bit more in that grind it down, super physical environment. They have a big time shot maker from the perimeter. They have a mismatch attacker in Cat. They have a veteran point guard in Conley. That with the elite defensive ceiling, the fact that they match up in terms of size, I think I would go Minnesota.
What about you, Logan?
I also would go Minnesota, and I have a different level of faith in this Minnesota half-court offense than I did at the beginning of the year. I love Mike Conley. I adore Mike Conley. He is like the perfect point guard, man. He's awesome. I trust his veteran leadership and presence. I trust Anthony Edwards being consistently great in a playoff run. And I trust everybody around him. I have loved the ball movement in Minnesota. I'm watching Rudy Gobert hit passes out of the short roll. I'm watching Naz Reid dot guys up. I'm watching Karl Anthony Towns make good passes. Like, I really believe in the offensive chemistry in Minnesota. And it's not to completely disregard your point, Jason. I think that is the biggest concern. This team's going to be rock solid defensively against who they go up against. It is going to be about generating points in the half court. But considering the Lakers' waning effort night to night, considering the Lakers' role player struggles, yeah, I just have a different level of faith in Minnesota, and I believe in this offense. I think they work. I just think they gel way better together, and I believe in them. I genuinely buy into Minnesota as a real contender.
Carson, where did you get that half-court offense stat? Because I've been looking at Cleaning the Glass. I have them below 100 points per 100 possessions, and they've been consistently a bottom half-court offense all season. So I'm just wondering where you got that number.
Synergy has them at 1.016 points per possession in the half-court, 73.
Okay, so it's so maybe that's because Synergy doesn't filter out garbage time. That's probably the difference. Cleaning the Glass does filter out garbage time. Either way, so you guys disagree with me on Minnesota. I believe that if the Lakers played Minnesota tomorrow, that's an older, more kind of experienced playoff team. Anthony Davis eats Rudy Gobert's lunch every time they play. Like that's a very important element that I don't think gets brought up enough in this particular conversation. And I would personally pick the Lakers. But let's you guys take Minnesota. Let's go to the next one. Would you take Oklahoma City or the Lakers if they started a series tomorrow?
I would take the Lakers. And I do want to be clear, it's still close for me on Minnesota because I really believe in Austin Reeves, and AD and LeBron. Picking against them terrifies me unless I believe the team has like overwhelming advantages. When it comes to OKC, I think they are awesome. I just think there's a different level of physical imposition that LA can unleash upon them that Minnesota is much better equipped to handle because they're huge in the front court. They've got veteran dudes. OKC is young. They're slight. And so even if they have more perimeter skill and they have some awesome dudes, I just think that physicality factor and having two of the three best players on the floor by a decent margin, I would still go with the Lakers there.
Yeah, I would definitely take LA in that matchup just because of the physical and athletic advantages that I think they could body OKC on the interior. Although that being said, man, there's a different level of faith with me in thinking that OKC is going to play hard. I can't get understood.
In a playoff series, I think the Lakers would play hard too. I mean, maybe not every single night. Like we saw it in the playoff run last year.
They'll punt road games. Yeah, the Lakers will punt road games.
In the Memphis series, I mean, it was like two or three games where I'm like, damn, man, like, did you guys even show up?
But they punt when they're up. That's the thing. Like they punt when it's like, oh, we got a 3-1 lead. I don't want to win game 5. We'll win game 6. You know what I mean?
Dude, LeBron has mastered the art of coasting. Like he is meticulous and very selective about when he punts, and it very rarely actually costs them in the playoffs because he's so deliberate about that.
Okay, so rapid fire. Would you take the Lakers or the Suns if a series started tomorrow?
Lakers.
LA.
Would you take the Lakers or the Kings if a series started tomorrow?
Oh, man, it's LA all day, man. That's not even close.
Lakers.
Okay, would you take the Lakers or the Pelicans if a series started tomorrow?
LA.
Lakers.
Okay, so you see the point I'm trying to make here. So that by the way, all these questions were in situations where the Lakers don't make a trade, okay? Mm-hmm. And they have a trade to make because they have some roster imbalances. So my point is like I'm lower on the Lakers because of basketball character stuff. Mm-hmm. But the reality is this team is going to march out, in all likelihood, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Austin Reeves, and trade return from the deadline, likely involving a first-round pick, and they've got players that they include for, and you know this team, when they make those moves, they come back from the deadline, they're going to lock in, and they're going to try to establish some stuff. That doesn't mean they're going to beat Denver or Boston, but I do think there's been a lot of like people overlooking classic LeBron January team trends.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think even though I'm lower on the Lakers than I was before the season in terms of I would have much rather had them just attack the regular season, I still think people writing them off are being silly because, and then again, it's last thing I'll say about it. Let's just look at the Timberwolves. Like, both of you guys picked the Timberwolves by some small margin. They haven't gotten out of the first round yet, guys. Like, this is not a team that has been through wars. They just haven't. So, like, that's not to say you write them off. I'm just saying, like, that's a huge advantage in my opinion. Like, just NBA history tells us it's like that's what allows a Warriors team that's on the way out, like a Warriors team that was about to crack, to beat the Sacramento Kings, even though they were on the road and didn't have home court advantage. Like, that's just what happens. It's the older, it's the experience, it's the best player in the series. Yeah. The Lakers would have the best player in the series. The Lakers would be older and more experienced. They would pack the paint. They would dare teams dare guys to shoot. I do think that would be an interesting series. All right, so now that we're outside of the top five, I want to pick up the pace a little bit. But we're going to move on to number 6, the Philadelphia 76ers. Logan, are you higher or lower on the Philadelphia 76ers as a contender than you were before the season?
I am much higher on them. One thing that this has to do with is the James Harden trade. I was anticipating being lower on Philadelphia. I thought they needed James Harden. I've now changed my stance on that. I think that Philadelphia in some ways is better without Harden. I think it has allowed a faster, more up-tempo team that just plays better in transition. I think it has allowed Tyrese Maxey to grow as a playmaker and as a lead ball handler. And everything just feels a lot more opened up. Like, I love James Harden. I love what he's doing in LA, but some possessions where, he's taking a couple extra dribbles or he's not moving the ball within the flow of the offense. I don't think they have those issues as much. There's not as much ball stopping. And then defensively, I really like Philadelphia. One, Embiid on the interior has been one of the best rim protectors in basketball, but I really like the personnel that they can throw at teams. Maxey's not a great defender, but he tries, right? He gives effort. I like D'Anthony Melton. I like Patrick Beverley as point of attack guys. They've got some size and athleticism on the wings. I legitimately buy Philly as a contender. Now, obviously, the biggest issue is Embiid, and if he's going to have these same woes that have plagued him in the playoffs. But I've seen legitimate growth from Embiid as a playmaker. I think he's playing more selfless team basketball. He's looking for other shots, and that's a big factor to me. Is I just don't think Embiid is going to disappear the way we've seen him in years previous. It could be easier said than done. It could happen again. I'm not anticipating it this year, and because of that, I legitimately buy the 76ers as contenders. I'm much higher on Philadelphia.
I'm much higher on them too. I felt pretty strongly this is a team that would win 50 games in the regular season just because Embiid is that sort of regular season force. And I have always been a Tyrese Maxey guy, and I thought that he could fill those shoes as an offensive number 2 and play really well. But I was not high on their postseason outlook. And I still don't like them in a series against Boston or Milwaukee, but I definitely like them more than I did coming into the year. Embiid is clearly better. He is the best as a shot maker that we've seen him. Last year was really good. I would argue this year has been even more consistently brilliant. And I saw a tweet today from NBA University that he leads the league in shots made from 15 to 19 feet and leads the league in field goal percentage from that range. He has just been devastating. And as a playmaker, hasn't just been better dissecting doubles and whatnot. He's been more involved across the board as a ball handler, has been more proactive just in his efforts to find and set up teammates. And there's 2 things that have consistently failed him in the playoffs. Well, actually, there's 4. There's his jump shot failing him. There's his playmaking failing him, where teams double him and he turns the ball over more than he assists his teammates. There's his health failing him, and there's his reliance on getting the line. So in the first 2 categories, he looks better now than ever before. The playoffs is a different arena, but I have more faith in him because of that. Maxey is much better than last year and is making the most of this opportunity. And then I think Nick Nurse is a real coaching upgrade. And I think that they nailed a couple of additions on the wings with Oubre and with Batum, who is still such a winning basketball player. And I undersold the value that he had for them when they got him in the Harden trade. I think that that has been a little bit of a hidden gem. So they're playing awesome. I definitely like them more.
So I'm higher on the Sixers. The big thing that stood out to me was Tyrese Maxey being kind of somewhat of a question mark coming into the season. Like, would he be able to step into this much larger role? He's just straight up kicked ass. Like, it's been, I think if you were to put together a spectrum of all the different ways that the Maxey as the number 1 perimeter option could have gone, it could not have gone better than it's gone to this point in the season. He's one of the best shooters in the league while also being one of the fastest players in the league, which is just a deadly combination. He's starting to figure out too, just like all the same timing stuff in terms of getting Embiid into his spots that James Harden had. Embiid's just insanely good. The jump shot, it's weird because like he's making a lot more of his like face up jab step jump shots, but he's missing a lot more of his off the dribble jump shots that he made last year, right? So like it's weird because like the actual jump shot numbers are about where they were last year. It just looks different. And it will be curious to see if he can make them when they get to the postseason. I also think Daryl Morey just nailed the James Harden trade. Got a really useful player back in Nicholas Batum. Marcus Morris has been able to play and make some impact in small doses. But most importantly, they got draft compensation back. So I think they're in a position where they can make an additional move. This is one of my like sneaky teams that I'd love to see get a DeJounte Murray. Because when I imagine a lineup where the perimeter speed of a Tobias Harris, Nick Batum type of 3-4 is not quite as impactful. I love the idea of getting a DeJounte Murray to kind of be basically a better version of what DeAnthony Melton is for them. The other thing with DeJounte Murray is he brings yet another dribble drive guy that can keep the defense in rotation for a team that when DeJounte would have the ball would be surrounded by Embiid, who's been a deadly catch and shoot 3-point shooter this year. Maxey, who's a deadly catch and shoot 3-point shooter. Nick Batum, who's a deadly catch and shoot 3-point shooter. Like that's where I really like that kind of fit. That's the type of guy that I'd be keeping an eye on. For Philly, I have them down at 6 because I just think in a playoff series, Tyrese Maxey is your number one perimeter option in his first ever playoff run in that type of role. Could be in for some growing pains. Just like, you know, I had a mailbag question in my show that I did today where people were like, someone asked about Tyrese Halliburton. It's like, I think Tyrese Halliburton is a transcendently great player. I don't think he's going to go into the postseason and just kick everybody's ass right away. Like it takes time. You got to like that environment is very much is like a growing pains type of environment. But like if they hit the deadline, the Sixers are like one of those teams where if they make the right type of trade, I'd put them up with Boston and with Denver. That's how good I think Joel Embiid can be when he gets to the postseason. It's just, can he get there healthy and can he make his jump shot when he gets there? And Embiid strikes me as one of those guys too that like when he breaks through, he's going to shatter through and like suddenly it's going to be like, he just it's going to be like someone in the YouTube comments said like Dirk like a Dirk-esque playoff run. That's kind of the way I look at it, where it's like he just has this reputation of being a playoff underperformer, and then when it goes right, he's just too good to not break through eventually. It's just going to be a question of when.
Yeah.
All right, number 7. We're going to start with you, Carson. The Minnesota Timberwolves. So are you higher or lower than you were on the Minnesota Timberwolves before the start of the season?
I am much higher, and I came into this season with some optimism, just thinking, all right, fully healthy. Can they figure out the offensive fit a little bit more with the two bigs? Can they defend at a very high level? But then early in the year, I was like, I still think it's too clunky. I just don't think offensively they can reach the ceiling that they need to. But as the year has gone on, I think the Cat has gotten more comfortable. I think that he's also just improved as a shot maker. And I think we have seen that this is a truly dominant defense. In the regular season, it has been by far the best defense in the league. Gobert has returned to his like peak level defensively, and he's doing that with by far the best defensive supporting cast that he's ever had. Awesome dudes at the point of attack. McDaniels is elite. Ant is really good when he wants to be. And Cat is doing so much more than we've ever seen him do defensively. He has committed so much more to that end of the floor as a secondary rim protector. We know the value he can have guarding big bodies in post-up scenarios, allowing Gobert to be a roamer in those playoff settings. And I think that has been valuable. I didn't expect them to be this great defensively, even if I thought that would be the strength of this team. And then I think Ant has taken a couple mini leaps, which I expected him to, but I think his playmaking is a bit better. I think we've seen him lean on that intermediate shot making a bit more, which has always been the weakness in his game. He's always been insane 99th percentile athlete getting to the rim. And he's been hot and cold as a pull-up shooter from deep, but has consistently improved there and has had really hot stretches. The thing has just been a lack of touch in terms of floaters and not really having any sort of mid-range game. And his efficiency has gone down in those areas. He got off to the year at a really good start, and he was really good for Team USA in the offseason. So I thought maybe he'd take a bit more of a leap there. but he's still more comfortable, I would say, at least with this super versatile all-around attack. And I really do like the supporting cast. I really like Conley. I really like McDaniels. I really like Kyle Anderson and Naz Reid off the bench. They're big. They're physical. They're not experienced on the level of AD and LeBron, but most of their dudes have been in those playoff environments before, and I do think that that matters. So this was not a team that I foresaw having a Western Conference Finals kind of ceiling, and now I absolutely think that they do.
Yeah, I totally concur. Heading into the season, I said the Rudy Gobert trade was the worst in NBA history, and I was completely wrong on that. I thought that this is going to be a complete disaster with the draft capital that they gave up, and I thought it wasn't ever going to work, and I was wrong. A lot of it has to do with the time that this team has put in, too, I agree. I think this is the best defense in basketball. I think it's going to hold up during a playoff run. And then offensively, I buy in, and it's little things. Like I mentioned, it's Gobert hitting guys out of the short roll now. It's Ant not being afraid to use his guys, like taking a pump fake at the top of the key. He feeds another guy and then cuts to the basket, and they feed it right back to him. Like, the team just knows how to play with each other. I love the ball movement during a Minnesota game. Like, it's an offense that I believe in the playoffs. I just think they work together, and they've played together long enough that they have real chemistry that I buy into. I'm much, much higher on the Timberwolves, and I wholeheartedly buy into them as a Western Conference Finals and potentially finals contender. Like Carson, I know you've said this on our show before too. It would take a lot in a hypothetical series against Denver, but I think they match up against Denver better than anybody else out west.
So I want to be clear. I am much higher on the Timberwolves than I was to start the season. I've been on the Timberwolves for a while, pretty much since the end of last season. I've just loved the idea of Ant, Jaden, and Rudy as just this unbelievable combination of like two just straight jackets on the perimeter. And then a dude that, you happen to beat them off the dribble. Well, here's one of the best rim protectors in NBA history waiting for you on the backside. Anthony Edwards is taking a leap. His last 18 games, he's like 29 points per game on like 49% from the field and 39% from three. That's over a stretch where they played almost exclusively good teams. The defense is insane and is legitimate. Like, we watched their defense against all good opponents over the last month and a half or so, and they've been excellent in all of those games. When I say that, like, I have a certain pessimism around the Minnesota Timberwolves in the postseason, it really is this simple. Their three main offensive weapons are Karl Towns, Mike Conley, and Anthony Edwards. Karl Towns is a historically inconsistent playoff performer. Like, great one game, awful the next. Mike Conley is a old skill guard. As the point of attack physicality picks up, slower skill guards tend to struggle a little bit. And Anthony Edwards is young. And like, once again, like we've talked about so many times on this, even just with the three of us, it's growing pains. How often do you see a dude in his early 20s like kick everybody's ass and go all the way? Like, maybe he's Kevin Durant, but that's Kevin Durant. He's one of the 10 greatest basketball players to ever play the game, at least in terms of the perimeter in modern NBA history, right? So the point being, like, I just have question marks about like the long-term, like winning 4 playoff series type of environment. Because here's the thing, like, Ant has shot really well with this pull-up jump shot as of late, and he shot really well in the postseason in 2 one-series samples. Ant's one of the things that happens in the postseason is everything becomes geared around your star's weakness. It's no different than Joel Embiid. Every single postseason, he gets more turnovers than assists as teams just throw the kitchen sink at him and test his passing ability. That's what I expect teams to do to Ant in the postseason. There's this kind of concept with Ant where it's like, you play off of him and you pray he misses. I could see teams going like, no, we're pressing up on you and we're packing the paint, and we're going to test you as a playmaker. Let's see if you're disciplined enough for a 7-game series to consistently make the right read. And by the way, we're going to close out short on Jaden McDaniels because he's got a little bit of a slower release. And Mike Conley, we're going to bully his legs until he's tired and old. And Karl Towns, can be inconsistent offensively in the postseason. So like, that's where I think things could get a little ugly for them. Is just, they have their primary 3 offensive players are 3 guys that are all 3 of them are guys that have some sort of playoff question mark surrounding them in some way, shape, or form. So that's why I have them as low as I have them. But the defense is real, and they are going to bully some teams physically. It just more comes down to that half-court slow-down environment and whether or not Anthony Edwards can go toe-to-toe with the very best players in the league and beat them in a playoff series. And NBA history tells us the dude in his early 20s typically does not. But I love the Timberwolves long term. I would give them they feel like one of those teams that 2 years from now is just going to be a perennial top tier contender. So I feel about Minnesota the way I feel about Oklahoma City. I view them as an upcoming staple in the league for a half a decade. I'm just saying in this singular season, they strike me as one of those teams that's overachieving a bit in the regular season and that will run into some roadblocks when they get to the postseason, which is super common for a team that's anchored by a young superstar. And that has a certain amount of athletic verve that they can rely on for the 82. Moving on to number 8, the Phoenix Suns. Logan, you're up first. Are you higher or lower on the Phoenix Suns than you were to start the season?
I'm a little lower on the Suns just because I did have pretty high expectations for them coming into this year. I thought that they would dominate the regular season. Honestly, Jason, I thought you summed it up really well with the Clippers talk. That was what I expected out of Phoenix, for them to just dominate skill-wise. Now, obviously, takes a while for everybody to get healthy. Brad Beal, KD. What we've seen with the big three, I think, is encouraging. They are going to be able to do that. And in a hypothetical series, that is terrifying to get matched up against, where they could just drop 120 to 130 on your head and steal a couple of games. It obviously comes down to the role players, right? And I'm not really moved enough yet to really say that I'm more confident in Phoenix. I was confident coming into this year with the role players. I thought they did the best job that they could in filling out the roster. And there's still just concerns who is going to take. They don't feel that far away to me, I guess is what I'm saying. But all of their role players are so one-dimensional. If it's Grayson Allen, if it's Josh Okogie, whoever you point to, they are really good on one side of the ball, but they're lackluster. They just need more two-way guys. I'm not out on the Suns, but I had really, really high expectations for them in the regular season that haven't been met. And so now I'm just left with injury and depth concerns, which is kind of were my red flags at the start of the year. So I'm not out on Phoenix by any means. They are much too talented to count out, but I just haven't seen enough of it for me to be really deeply moved by Phoenix.
I'm a little bit lower on Phoenix, even though at full strength, I would say they've looked pretty similar to what I expected, because other teams have shown me more, because I have been really impressed by Minnesota and OKC and certainly the Clippers. I do think that their offense is really good. And when the big three has been out there together, it's a small sample size, only 175 minutes, but they have an offensive rating of 124. That's pretty damn good. And you just don't see teams who have 3 shot makers of this level, 3 ball handlers who are this devastating. And when you pair that with the spot-up shooting that we've seen from Grayson Allen, who has barely missed all year, and Eric Gordon, that's a scary offensive combination. The problem for me is the same thing that has been obvious since they put together this core. They are a low-volume three-point shooting team. They are very accurate there, but they're 23rd in threes made, which means they're not as inclined to go on those sprees like you might see from Boston. And at the same time, they're 28th in field goals made inside of 5 feet. So when you are lacking in both high-end rim pressure and you are lacking in consistent dynamic volume three-point shooting, you can have 3 of the most skilled mid-range shot makers in the league. But at the end of the day, you're trading tough twos when other teams are getting easier twos or they're getting good looks from 3. So for a team that is so offensively slanted, that just scares me. That scares me when you're comparing it to the formula Denver has, where it's elite shooting and elite paint force. Even the formula that the Clippers have, because they have more elite three-point shooting. Because defensively, this team can only be so good. They've rebounded well this year. They just have fundamental limitations there. They're 16th in defensive rating. And when you have core lineups that involve Beal and Allen and Nurk out there, I just think you can only climb so high. I think we did see an interesting look with KD at the 5. I think that'll be fun for specific matchups. It kind of gave fits to the Kings. I thought that was a bit embarrassing for Sabonis. They looked quicker defensively. They doubled, they rotated well, and offensively it was awesome. It was super spread out. They had skill everywhere against some of the really big teams who will punish them for going small like that. I don't know how viable it is for extended stretches. I think it can be a weapon. I don't think it's a fix to some of the limitations they have. So this team looks a lot like I expected, but I'm a little bit lower on them.
Yeah, I'm lower as well, just because, again, I thought they'd look like, I put it in my notes, I thought they'd look like the 2022 Nets. Like, that's just what I expected. I expect them just to rack up the wins. I do want to give them some slack in the sense that the Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant combo hasn't had that much time to work together. The KD at the 5 stuff is interesting because I agree with you, Carson. I think it's very matchup specific, and I think it's a short doses thing because it depended on two things. One, Kevin Durant playing some of the best defense that you've seen from him in the last 5 years. Like, just he was so incredible defensively down the stretch of that game. And then two, there were multiple examples where Sabonis had smaller defenders on him and just didn't even look at the basket. But that's kind of like one of the advantages of that type of lineup is it's a curveball. It's an off-speed pitch. It's one you throw to disrupt the rhythm of the game, and then you bail out of it quickly. Or if there is a matchup where you have some advantage, you could stick with it. But like I use the death lineup as an example, not because I think it's as good as the death lineup. That's the greatest lineup that's ever touched a basketball court, especially when you add Kevin Durant into that mix. But it was never used to start games. It was never used as like their I mean, they used it to, I think they occasionally started Andre Iguodala in the playoffs before KD got there. But like for the most part, it was a counter that Golden State used in short doses to screw up a basketball game and then to close basketball games. And so that's kind of the way I see it. But again, like you said it perfectly, Carson, NBA history tells us teams that rely on pull-up jump shooting and don't get easy shots around the basket that also aren't great on defense typically don't win. And so that doesn't mean the Suns can't win, but through 40 games or 41 games through half the season, I certainly am lower on them than I was before the season because I was expecting more. All right, we have 3 more before we get out of here today. Starting with you, Carson, the Oklahoma City Thunder. Are you higher or lower on the Oklahoma City Thunder than you were to start the season?
I am definitely higher, and I would be higher on them than a team like the Suns because I think, yeah, there is obviously the playoff experience factor and the fact that the Suns have KD, Book, and Beal. But I think that SGA could easily be the best player in that series. I think that he is a dominant force, and I think that the supporting cast in OKC is excellent. I have been a big Jalen Williams guy. Oh my goodness, though, he is so good. The tear that he is on this month, I think they've played 10 games. He's shot like 65% from the field, 60% from deep, while he's giving you 21 points, 6 assists a game. Just a problem athletically, a good playmaker, a really good shooter. And I think that Chet added another dimension here in terms of dynamic play finisher, really good 3-point shooter, stretch big, another guy who you trust to handle a bit, to play make, and then defensively is an awesome rim protector. The limitation they have is, experience does matter. I think that they're good enough to where they could win a first-round series just based off of talent, but making a run to the finals is like another conversation. And B, they are so slight in the front court. They're one of the weakest rebounding teams in the league. Chet is an elite rim protector. He is not a very good rebounding 5, and the other dudes around him, like, they have athletic wings. They just don't have big physical wings. And so I think that as well as they may defend all around, that's going to put a bit of a ceiling on them. But I love the Thunder. I thought they would take a leap this year to be like a 48-win team, really tough first round out. Maybe they sneak a first round series. And I think that they are clearly ahead of schedule, and the future is insanely bright. Because I mentioned the big 3, but like, I love Cason Wallace. I think that they can move Josh Giddey, and I think that he has started to recuperate his value a bit because he's been playing better. He didn't look like an NBA player for like a month and a half this year. So the future is crazy bright, but they're just not quite there. Really is a matter of youth largely.
I wholeheartedly agree with Carson. I'm much higher on the Thunder coming in. I want to give a massive shout out to Chet Holmgren for what he's done on the interior, defending, completely transforming the inside of this defense, and just for the effort that OKC gives night to night. I do want to ask you, Jayson, if you have any ideas. I know we've talked about this periodically. I mean, is there a move you guys think they should explore at the deadline to accelerate this timeline?
I still lean towards Lauri Markkanen would be the one that I'd be looking at. But if Lauri's unavailable, I'd hang tight. Like, I don't think Jeremy Grant's that guy. I don't think DeAndre Hunter is that guy. I don't think there's like a obvious guy that they should like. Carson mentioned this, and this is the truth. Like, we're all higher on the Thunder, and we were already high on the Thunder before the season. Like, I was with Carson. I thought they'd be right in the mix, and instead they're like better than most of the teams. That's where it's been. Again, like, I want to be clear. I put Minnesota and Oklahoma City together. Minnesota's further along on that path like, to be clear, Minnesota's further along on that path, but Oklahoma City's on the same path. And what I mean by that is, like, they're both on like a freight train towards like bona fide year in, year out championship contention led by a bona fide superstar. I think SGA and Ant both are like legitimate superstars. I just don't necessarily see, unless they feel like throwing the Godfather offer at Markkanen, I just don't see the point of rushing that process simply because of the fact that they're not going to win it this year. They're just not. They're too small. They're way too small. They're not going to win it this year. That's not to say they can't, but it's like their chances are extremely slim on that front. Not only are they're young and they're small. Those are two. That's a death sentence in the NBA playoffs, in my opinion. So, like, the other thing too is you could argue even on the Markkanen front. Like, and I'll just pitch this one back to you guys. Like, wouldn't they be better off looking for more of a dirty work for? Like, wouldn't they be better off looking for like the next Aaron Gordon?
Ooh, probably, but it would be tough for me to pass on Markkanen to some extent. I just think that he's such an awesome fit offensively. He's so good, first of all. And I don't think that you're going to be able to pry him away from Utah right now. That's a team that has won 15 of their last 21. They almost beat the Thunder last night. Will Hardy is an amazing coach, but
that's like January basketball, Carson. That's a young,
those
fast
teams were playing
team in
hard.
January.
Oh, the overall stretch. Yes, absolutely.
That's a young, fast team in January. That's so classic.
Totally agree. I want to be clear. I don't think that the Jazz make the playoffs this year. If they did, I think they get boat raced. I think when you look at the top 11 teams in the West, there are 10 teams that are more talented than the Utah Jazz pretty clearly. But Lowry is that dude. He's amazing. I could talk about him to no end. But yeah,
what if I offer you 6 picks?
I mean, if you give me 6 picks and if you give me like Kason Wallace, because you got to make the contracts. It's easy to match contracts with Lowry because he makes $18 million a year is the other thing. Yeah, I would do that if I were the Jazz.
So then why not? And why not give yourself an additional playoff run to build chemistry and battle scars with that group?
I would. I would. I would absolutely be all in on Lowry if I were the Thunder. But I also agree with you. If there were an equally good player in the archetype of an Aaron Gordon, where it's like, hey, this is a dude who can defend the post at a really high level. Lowry's a really good rebounder, but he's certainly progressed defensively. He's just not going to be a legitimate plus there. But if you can get Lowry, I get Lowry because I think Lowry is probably a top 25 player in the league. It might be the most underrated star in basketball. He is just a hyper efficient, crazy versatile offensive weapon who doesn't need the ball, who does add size, who is not slight. Like, he's strong, he's physical. I would love that for them.
I think that's a home run.
Go ahead, Logan.
I mean, I just think that's a home run. I would do that in a heartbeat. Like, it addresses everything, the size, the spacing. Screw defense at that point, guys. Let's just go score 135 points a game, man.
Well, I do still think it would make their defense a little bit better because you would at least have another big body and plus rebounder on the interior, but it wouldn't really move the needle there.
Well, the other thing too is you don't need speed out of that 4 spot. You need verticality. You need someone that can help in low man situations, like cleaning up messes when Chet leaves his feet, cleaning up the defensive glass. Like, that's the case for Markkanen is like Aaron Gordon is one of the most important perimeter defenders for Denver because of all the big wings in the West. Like, he's the guy who guards Kawhi. He's the guy who guards LeBron James. Like, that's why they need Aaron Gordon. But like for OKC, it's like that's Lou Dort. Like, Lou Dort's taking that assignment, so they can kind of like they can actually use Markkanen as more of a low man. All right, we got 2 more before we get out of here. Number 10, the Miami Heat. Logan, higher or lower on the Miami Heat than you were to start the season?
I am very high on the Miami Heat. I thought with their losses in this offseason that they were going to fall off a little bit. Now, I say fall off. How much can the Miami Heat ever really fall off in a regular season? You got a rock-solid culture and identity with Eric Spoelstra, with Jimmy Butler, with Bam Adebayo. The team is always going to win 40 games. They're always going to be in the playoff picture, and they're always going to be looming. The 2 guys that have swung this for me are Jaime Jaquez Jr. and Nikola Jovic. You know, I was critical of both picks at the time. Jovic, because he didn't crack the lineup in his rookie year, really. And then Jaime Jaquez, I just got wrong. I mean, I just thought that Triple J was not – I thought he was a really good college player. And I thought that it wasn't going to fully translate. Like, he'd be good at doing a lot of little things, but I didn't think he'd be great anywhere. And his athleticism didn't pop enough for me. The guy's just a baller. Like, there's just guys that you watch that just get it, and he can do everything at every level. Mid-range, on the low block, from the perimeter, he can handle, he can set you screens, he can defend, he crashes the glass, he's an athlete. Like, he's just a ball player. I want him. You know what I mean? I just want him. He is a rock-solid role player. And then Jokic, oh my gosh, man, same thing. He can shoot. He moves the ball like the ball doesn't stick on his hands. He can handle. He's an athlete. He can defend. We can take for granted, because I always think in the draft, it's like, oh, we're looking to hit this home run. You want the star guard that's going to go fill up and go get buckets. So I want the big man that is going to dominate the interior. Sometimes you just get the good players that are going to fit in the rotation and give you a great 25 a night. Both of those guys are going to give you a great 25 to 30 a night. And I think that's a real difference maker in a playoff series for Miami. And not only that, I think they are legitimate upgrades from the role players that Miami has had that have overachieved in years previous. I think that they're better than those guys. I'm much, much higher on the Miami Heat, and it comes down to those two young wings.
I am also higher on the Heat. I don't know if I'm quite as high on Jokic as you are. I do like his feel offensively. I like his skill. Not sure I would really describe him as an athlete, and I'm not sure the level that he's defending at. Like, I think that he definitely plays with effort, but I just think there are some limitations there. Hawkes is awesome, though. I sold him short, too. I thought that they needed to add like a more legitimately big guy in the front court who they could play alongside Bam, because I felt that lack of size was so consistently exposed. But he's just an awesome do-it-all wing and so skilled, so versatile. So I'm higher on them. And also, when you look at the overall cast of wings, it's not just those two who are definitely positives. Duncan Robinson, what could have been seen as like a fairy tale run in the playoffs, his resurgence is real. He's legitimately more comfortable as a ball handler. He is legitimately more comfortable as a playmaker. And I think then you add Caleb Martin, who is still good. Josh Richardson. Like, it's just a better wing rotation than last year. And they have dealt with injuries to everybody. And I mean everybody. Hero's missed half the year. Jimmy's missed, 15 games. Bam's missed 10 games. And they're still 7 games above 500. So I think that's a testament to the fact that this is a more talented overall basketball team. That being said, would I expect them to have more success than last year, which I guess would mean winning the NBA title? No. And I wouldn't expect them to replicate last year's success, because so many outlier things had to go in their way. Insane shooting, really masterful exploitation of opposing teams' weaknesses that I don't think is necessarily replicable at that level again. Jimmy being like a top 5 dude on the planet for a couple rounds. That was a pretty remarkable Heat run. But how I felt about them, knowing all that, looking at their roster coming into this year, I think that I am higher on them now.
Yep, I'm higher as well. Did you guys know Jaime Jaquez Jr. is the second best post-up player in the league, minimum 50 reps this year?
So awesome. And that's one thing, just real quick. Logan said the thing about him being like such a college bucket. That's like how I felt. I was like, okay, this dude doesn't have like a crazy first step. He's not a volume efficient 3-point shooter. He's cooking dudes with his post game at 6'7". And it's just like stuff you don't really see in the league, but he's so good at it that it translates.
That wing that's strong but maybe not as tall is almost becoming one of the more underrated positions in the league, because the league has gone so heavy into the tall, skinny wing. And we're just seeing like that lower center of gravity is just so good in the bully ball elements of the game. I love what you said about Duncan Robinson. I think both Duncan Robinson and Tyler Herro have just gotten way better at weaponizing their shooting ability to make plays for other people. Jimmy Butler's been out this entire stretch, and they're still like a serious basketball team. Bam Adebayo's shooting 45% on pull-up jump shots this year. That's a huge upside in my opinion. And they have a trade to make. And, they're another one of those teams like Philly, where if they hit a home run at the trade deadline and bring in some sort of legitimate secondary shot creator, just because I'd prefer Tyler Herro and Duncan Robinson as like second side guys. If they can figure that piece out, like another dude who can like actually legitimately take over the offense and give Jimmy a break in a playoff setting, because I still am not necessarily sure Bam is ready for that. If they get that, that's where they could get into that really serious level. All right, we have one last team before we get out of here for today. Number 11, and I will never give up faith in the Golden State Warriors as long as Steph Curry is on the roster. I also think they're dealing with a whole lot of classic like kind of like what the Lakers did last year, where it's like this team is just wants so badly to fast forward until after the deadline. Like you can just tell that's what's happening. And I fully expect them to re-engage at that point. But it's been ugly to this point. 2 games out of the play-in. Golden State Warriors, Carson, are you lower or higher on them than you were to start the season?
I am significantly lower. I was optimistic about this team because I thought that they made some awesome moves in terms of adding depth. I really loved the draft with Pods and especially TJD as a value pick. I mean, Pods has ended up clearly being the better of the two, the more valuable of the two, but I thought getting TJD at 57 was insane. I liked what Chris Paul did for the second unit. I really liked Saric, and I felt that if the starting lineup could sustain their level, then that just meant that this would be a better team than last year when they still won a round in the playoffs. But despite some of the wins that they have taken, like the fact that I've actually loved the depth pieces, there have just been far more losses. I did not expect Andrew Wiggins to fall off a cliff and reach the point where it's like, yeah, we'll start any combination of our young wings over him. Looney and Clay have both had underwhelming seasons, and this team just hasn't defended at the level that we're used to. Even with Draymond out there, they've been 25th in defensive rating. And I think what has, to some extent, sealed their fate, and I can't say this with finality because we haven't reached the deadline yet, but missing out on Siakam hurts, especially because you're calling Kuminga untouchable, which I get. Jonathan Kuminga is good, but this is what we've talked about before and what I think has been a gripe of many Warriors fans. The 2 timeline thing is a fantasy, and it has been conclusively proven as a fantasy because here you are now when a couple years ago you could have made a move for a Siakam or any number of guys if you were willing to move these picks that just didn't materialize as valuable for this window.
And none of those dudes played in the finals. None of those dudes played in the finals. None of them.
Literally. And James Wiseman was, your crown prince. So it just doesn't happen. You don't sustain multiple windows at the same time on an NBA team. And when you have Steph Curry and he is still a superstar level player, I would be doing everything that I can, even if you think it's a crazy long shot at a title, which to me, it would still be a real long shot if they did bring a Siakam or a Markkanen, who I think it's going to be really tough to move for. I would still do it just to be a legitimately good competitive basketball team that can make a Western Conference Finals run because future be damned, dude. It's Steph Curry. He's the best player in your franchise history, and you kind of owe that to him. And I think that they've squandered that opportunity. Again, not for sure, but it certainly looks that way. And that to me seals their fate. They're too small. They're not defending at the same level. The lack of a real high-end second option alongside Steph kind of seals their fate, and they haven't addressed those issues. So I am concretely lower on them.
Yeah, well said, Carson. I thought Golden State, I just have the utmost faith in Golden State as a franchise and as an organization. Like I considered them as a real title contender heading into this season. I don't really feel the same way now. In January, guys, they are 7th in offensive rating, which is encouraging, right? They're dead last in defensive rating. They have a defensive rating of 127 in the month of January. That's an 8-game sample size. It's like
that's gross.
Wiggins can't figure it out. You got the Draymond Green drama. You got Stephen Curry frustrated. The deadline's up in the air, and like Carson said, they're straddling timelines. Like it seems like their championship hopes are really sinking fast. Jayson, like you said, man, I don't know if I could ever count out the Warriors with Steph Curry on the roster, but I'm closer than I've ever been before.
So I'm lower as well. I don't know how you could be higher.
Yeah.
If there's a Warriors fan out there, leave it in the comments. Break it down for me. I want to hear the case. Yeah, but there's the Pods thing is like anytime you hit on a draft pick like that, like that's obviously super encouraging. But here's the thing. First of all, the Andrew Wiggins thing, he's just never been able to get back on track. Sam Esfandiari, who's come on the show before, is a friend of mine. He said this on Twitter the other day, and I thought it was really interesting. He goes, why do we keep looking at this as a decline? Zoom out on Wiggins' career for a second. That's the outlier. With the exception of 2022, when he was one of the best 3-and-D guys in the league, he's been mostly this. And then a version of him on the Wolves where he put up good stats on a bad team, right? And even those stats weren't overly efficient, right? So like he just put up volume scoring numbers. So like maybe Wiggins is this. And it was this transcendently outlier performance in 2022 that pushed him over the top. That's the first piece of it. Steph is not playing particularly well. Now, I want to cut him some slack because I do think there's a little bit of like, I don't think he believes that this team can win. I mean, Steve Kerr straight up came out and said that. Like, he thinks the team has lost belief. And I think that's an important part of this. I will, here's the silver lining. Technically, because of Draymond removing himself from the team and then being injured at the start of the season, they really haven't played with Steph and Draymond that much this year. Mm-hmm. So that's the one piece of it. And then two, even though they missed out on Siakam, and obviously I agree with you, Carson. I think that was what that was is like the last nail in the coffin was there and somebody hit it with the hammer once. And the nail is like very close.
Yeah.
And it's like there's still just a little bit of a gap for you to maybe like kind of get the wedge end of the hammer in there and then pull the nail out. But they're going to have to nail the deadline. And so before we get out of here, I pitched this on my show the other day, and I just wanted to kind of hear both of your guys' take on it. And we'll start with you, Carson. Let's say that Golden State calls up Brooklyn. And they offer Andrew Wiggins, Moses Moody, Jonathan Kuminga. And they ask for Mikal Bridges and Dorian Finney-Smith. First of all, I expect, let's go around like this first. Do the Nets say yes?
I mean, I think that would be robbery if the Warriors got the Nets to accept that. I don't think, like, if we just go asset to asset, Jonathan Kuminga, to me, is very unlikely to ever be as good as Mikal Bridges is right now. Maybe I shouldn't say very unlikely. Okay, maybe very unlikely is strong. I would say unlikely. I think that Kuminga has a special combination of athletic traits. You do not see dudes who blend quickness with strength, with just elite vertical ability like him. But I think that in a lot of the peripheral skill elements of his game, we're still looking at a dude who's pretty raw. He's been really good this year. He's been a lot better. But Mikal fits so seamlessly into winning basketball with what we know he looks like when he's engaged defensively. Elite there, elite three-point shooter, super smart cutter. And DFS, he's not too valuable to Brooklyn right now. Really, he would be great for the Warriors. But I don't look at any of those assets and think that they're enough to move Brooklyn off of Mikal. Moody, I really like, but he's a like pretty low ceiling 3-and-D wing. If the Warriors got that, I mean, that would fundamentally change my outlook. Then I would say, I mean, yeah, that's a team.
We'll get there in a minute. Just focus on the Nets for now.
Okay. I don't think the Nets would take that.
Okay. What about you, Logan? We lost Logan's mic.
My bad, guys. I honestly don't think Jason's that far off with this deal. Kuminga to me is still a very, very valuable asset for the future. Like, I just think about this timeline-wise. That would be my pitch to Brooklyn. Your timeline is not right now. You're not winning anything. Pair Cam Thomas up with a young wing. I think he's got a lot of value. Like, I still think Mikal Bridges is the best player in the deal, but you're getting Wiggins too. My only issue is that the fact that the Brooklyn Nets
Wiggins.
Well,
you have to get Wiggins.
give me a second here. That's the one thing that I have is that the Brooklyn Nets would have Andrew Wiggins and Ben Simmons, and just considering that Ben Simmons hasn't played, Wiggins has struggled. You just have two really big negative assets on big contracts that would be pretty hard to move at this point. I honestly think value-wise, though, I don't think Jason's that far off with this deal.
So here's the take for why the Nets should consider it. Mikal Bridges is 27 years old. Cam Johnson, 27 years old. Spencer Dinwiddie, 30 years old. Dorian Finney-Smith, 30 years old. This is not the Utah Jazz. This is not a young, fun team with a bunch of upside. These guys are who they are. Mikal Bridges is not a star. He is an outstanding role player. One of the very best role players in the league. He can score the basketball a little bit, but if you make him your primary creator, you're not going to win many basketball games.
Yep.
That's the reality. Jonathan Kuminga, in my opinion, does have star upside. That would be the case. And specifically, I have this belief system, like you always should be trying to get your number one guy. You got to be trying to get the best guy. One of those guys that's in that list of 10 dudes that you can win a championship with. There's no reason to just be holding on to a bunch of late 20s role players.
Yeah.
That everyone else in the league could use way more than you while you're a bad basketball team. Or a significantly below average basketball team. Now, I would be 100% with you if it was like Mikhail's 23.
Right.
And we think this dude by age 27 can be one of the top 20 dudes in the league. But that's not what this is. So that's where I kind of see the case. I'd be looking at it as like, I'm getting Moses Moody, who is a young dude who could become a great role player in this league. And I've got Jonathan Kuminga, who could become potentially one of the stars of this league. And then I have Andrew Wiggins, who I could probably turn around and flip again if I wanted to somebody else, or flip at the over the summer, right? Now, let's forget about all that for a second. Let's pretend Brooklyn goes, no, we like Mikal Bridges more than Jonathan Kuminga. And then Golden State goes, okay, here's a bunch of draft compensation too. And then Brooklyn says yes.
Yeah.
Now, Dorian Finney-Smith and Mikal Bridges are on the Golden State Warriors between Steph, Clay, and Draymond. Start with you, Carson. How seriously would you take that team as a contender?
I would take that team probably as seriously as anybody out west, other than certainly Denver and maybe the Clippers. But I think that they would be firmly in that tier, because I think that they would fundamentally raise their defensive ceiling. They would add shooting. They would add some size. I mean, they would have awesome overall wing defense. And I will say, I think the draft compensation would do it, because you make good points. And I do think that Jonathan Kuminga is going to be really good. I just think Mikal as like your third guy, pretty ideal third guy. But you're right. What does Brooklyn need a third guy for? They're not even close to a first guy.
And he's 27.
And he's 27. He really is who he is at this point. So I think that would be a big win for the Warriors.
I'd have him up there with the Clippers. And one thing that you mentioned earlier, Jason, was just kind of the vibe and the energy around Golden State. I mean, don't you guys think that lights a little bit of a fire under him too? Oh,
hell yeah, it does.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The vibes are broken right now. That would repair them.
Yeah, and what I like about that kind of lineup too is it very much is not trying to be Denver. It's very much like still trying to be Golden State in a very kind of like in a very unique way. Like they'd be a little thin. But what I also like too is it would maintain the bench mob. Like you'd still have Trace Jackson Davis and Dario Saric and Brandon Podziemski and Chris Paul. Yeah. Like and Gary Payton. Like you'd maintain your bench mob. You'd maintain your ball handling when Steph's off the floor. That to me is the move. That to me, I would be calling Brooklyn and I'd be like, I want Mikal Bridges and Dorian Finney-Smith, because that to me is like, I'm not. You're also bringing in a couple of guys specifically one guy in Mikal Bridges that is so damn talented and so firmly in the heart of his prime that it just kind of reinvigorates and buys you time for guys like Podziemski to develop, buys you time to, figure out what you're going to do with some of these other veteran guys in the long run. You know what I mean? To me, it's like a very nice kind of like little soft rebuild. All right, guys, we've been going like almost 2 hours. I sincerely appreciate you guys taking the time. Thank you all of our listeners for supporting the show. I am going to go take 5 days off and do some skiing in Denver. I sincerely appreciate, or it's not in Denver, but in Breckenridge. I sincerely appreciate all of you guys for rocking with us when we get back. It's straight grind until the middle of June. I was talking to Ryan Brumley, our lead producer here at Hoops Tonight the other day, and I think we're going to try to get the Nerd Sesh guys on every other Friday if you're up for it. So no pressure, but I'm asking you here on the air. So you have no choice but to say yes.
We'd love nothing more.
All righty. I appreciate you guys. Have a good weekend. I'll see you on Wednesday.